Hi, I'm Michael Jordan from AB Friendly Company, and we're back down here at the Underground Meadery. We've went over some equipment that you're going to need, some fermentation devices, types of honey, some different types of yeast. I guess we should just dive in and make a mead. And whenever you make a mead, you should be drinking a mead. This is a dragon's blood mead that we make. It's sangria grapes that we have a friend juice in Spain and sent to us in a wood aged fermentation. It's got a nice color to it, and then it has a deep wood taste to it. So we'll be drinking some dragon's blood while we do our first mead of our 52 meads in a year. Everything that I'm going to show you is very simple. We're going to go from making it to show you the fermentation to racking it and what it looks like after you cold crash it to bottle it. So we're going to go through a whole bunch of steps here. I've got my pitchers of water. What I've done is I've dumped out my gallon jug of water into a couple pitchers, and I've even dumped some into my coffee pot. Remember, I have two coffee pots, one to do juices and one to do just strictly waters. Remember, we want to heat the water up so it doesn't kill the enzymes in the honey, but dissolves the sugar. So we have our coffee pot. Some people like to boil their water and let it sit. Some people are using tea steamers, but you need something to help dissolve the honey a little bit, so we're using the coffee pot method. I've got my honey. This was a 4-pound jar of honey. We had it on our scale. We dumped off 1 pound, so I have 3 pounds in this jar. We're going to be using the Red Star Premier Champagne yeast, the balloon for the airlock. I have a thermometer here so we can check the temperature. We want to make sure it's about room temperature before we dump the yeast. I have my hydrometer here set to the side so that way we can take a reading. I have my index card with the recipe that we're going to be using, and we'll show you how to fill this out and how it all goes together. This is just a funnel that we're using. It was a huge liquor bottle that we cut the top off of, and that way we can pour the honey in. It seems to sit perfect for what we're going to be using, and it's big enough to let the honey roll in so it doesn't roll off the side and make a mess. I've got my measuring cup here for the yeast, and basically what we're going to do is we're going to add the honey to the jug. We're going to add the hot water to the honey, shake it, mix it up. We're going to add some hot water to the honey jar to get the residual sugar out, put it in. We'll add the water to fill it up, shake it up, mix it up. We will take a temperature reading, and we'll write that temperature reading down to make sure that when we drop the yeast what the temperature was, and we'll take a hydrometer reading to see what our potential alcohol is. Then we can cap it with a balloon. From there, we're going to bring up another mead that has been made a week ago, and you're going to see what the fermentation looks like. Then we're going to bring out a mead to show you what it looked like made a month ago. So it was over 30 days ago when this mead was done, to show you that it's clearing up and that we want to rack it to cold crash it. And then I have a mead that's already been cold crashed and racked down into a bottle so we can start bottling it. So we're going to show you the whole phase of making a mead, and this is the simple meads. No nutrients, no bases, no clarifications, no filters. All of these that you're going to see right now are all the same and made the same way. And so we'll go ahead and get started. Good thing to get started, huh? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use 3 pounds of honey. I'm using clover honey for this round. And we'll try to get it all in here without making too much of a mess. It's pretty thick. Now, while you dump stuff in like this, you can go ahead and add your water to your coffee pot and turn it on. I've already had mine started a little bit so that way I could kind of get the video advanced, but this would be a good time as you're pouring your honey to go ahead and let your coffee pot percolate with a little bit of hot water. so that way you can melt down some of the sugars as you go. Now we're using the 1 gallon plastic jug from the dollar store. So let's go over the price of what this is going to cost us. Honey is going to be your most expensive part in any type of your mead making. If you're shipping in Manuka honey from New Zealand at $60 a pound, or you're buying AB friendly honey at $8 a pound, or if you're buying store shelf honey at $3 a pound. Remember, it's going to be your source of honey. This one is going to be the first mead of the month of January 2017. So the first honey that we're going to use for the beginning of this month is clover. So we're using clover honey from AB Friendly Company at $8 a pound. So that's $8 we have invested in this. We have a $1 gallon jug that we're going in. So 3 times 8 is 24, plus the gallon jug for $1 is 25. We're going to go the yeast pack. This is $1 for 26. And we're going to use the balloon from the dollar store, which is another $1 for a packet of for $27. So we have other extra equipment, but you're going to be reusing this equipment, part of your investment in making mead. But right now what we're going to have is about $27 invested in a gallon of mead. Now if you were to go to a liquor store, a package place, a winery, or some place that you're going to buy wines from, a bottle of wine averages about $15 for 750 milliliters. A gallon of fermentation is usually about 3.5 of those bottles. So 2 of those bottles is $30. So basically we've already paid for 2 bottles, and we're going to get a bottle and a half for free from making our own meads this way. So when you're mixing all this together, as you can see, we're getting it all in here. I am going to add some hot water to this, and remember to save your lids to your equipment, because what this is going to do is allow us to add the hot water to them to shake them all up. We want to use the hot water in this jug to get the residual sugar out as much as we can get. We're going to run a little hot water in the funnel to get the residual sugar out. We want 3 pounds of honey, so when we take the hydrometer reading, we can make sure when we make further recipes based on this, if you like it, this is going to be your recipe. That way you can judge it, and you can make sure your specific gravities are within the same margins every time with the type of honey you're using. This index card, we will put tape on it. We will tape it to the jug, and this will tell us that it's going to be clover mead. We're using 3 pounds of clover honey, 1 gallon of dollar store water, 1 pack of Red Star Premier Blanc champagne yeast. We will take a temperature reading, we will take a starting gravity reading, and we're going to put the date on it. And this will give us the time frame when we started, so we can kind of justify the 30 days to 40 days of fermentation, how we started on our specific gravities, what the temperatures are when we did the yeast, and plus our recipe. Sometimes these cards are going to be very big, depending on all the ingredients that you use. So as we get going, right, you might even just have a card that'll say number 27 in your book. Habanero passion fruit mead, which will have a lot of spices, the recipes for the paste, the types of honey. So you might just have that on there so you can go back to your recipe book. But this is going to be your recipe for this. We've almost got all the honey in, so I'll probably do this last pour here, and then I'm going to probably flush out my honey jar with the hot water. We're going to start adding it to the base here. My honey here is a little bit thick. It's cold here in Wyoming, so our honey was spun before October. So we've had October, November, December. We're getting into January, so about 3 months, and the honey start to crystallize. Now I get some really good cotton honey from a gentleman named Jason Smith out of Weatherford, Texas. And his cotton honey, it crystallizes a lot faster, but I think it makes a good superior mead. And hopefully we'll be able to get him to ship up some of his cotton honey for one of the meads we make in the month, because I think it makes a really good mead. I think the sugar content is very good. So we have a little residual honey in our jar. So you should just take a little bit of your hot water, pour it in. It doesn't take very much. We'll put our lid back on. Now remember, when you shake this around with the sugar, it's going to want to steam. Right? So it's going to want to boil out a little bit, so just be kind of cautious of that. Now, if you notice, all the equipment we used, we didn't run any star sand through. We didn't use any detergent. The water jug had water from the store in it, and we're just putting a viable chemical back in it, which is the water and honey. And honey is a sugar source that's antiseptic. Right? Things don't grow in it. You can't use it for kombucha because it kills kombucha organisms, right? So it's used for burns. It's antiseptic. So it doesn't have a lot of stuff in it that's going to cause any rot or decay. So we're just heating water and using the water jug that was before and the honey that's in the jar. So there's not like a really need to use star sand, which is a sanitation agent. You can get some different types of sanitizers and cleaners for your equipment. Mostly when we're done and we're using stuff, we run it through a hot dishwasher. And it kills everything, cleans everything really nice so you can reuse it. And so that's something you should think about, is just kind of clean everything before you use it. Don't use a heavy sanitizer or a lot of chemicals, because you don't want any detergent taste in your mead. And that's one reason why we try to go, this is like the most natural mead that you can make at home, other than what they call the drunkard's fruit. And that's where you find comb on a tree. You smoke the bees off the comb by putting a fire underneath it. You boil water underneath it, and you take your hot knife and stick it in the flame, and then you cut the comb, and the honey drains off into your pot of hot water. And honeycomb is set not straight out, but at an angle. So as you can see, it's like an angle. It would have residual honey in it. You splash water on it. The pollen, the water, and the sugar from the honey makes a fruit in the air that's kind of gushy, and the wax comb that you would eat fermentates in a week because the cells are so small, and they called it the drunkard's fruit. It's one of those that came from my lore from my grandfather's book about when the Norks and Irish Vikings went down to steal honey and honeybees. So it's one of the first drunkard's fruit that was made. So just giving a little slosh in there, right? I'm able to get all the honey and residue out. The honey's basically all drained out of my funnel. So we're just going to run some of this down through it. And I like to use my honey jars again for when I'm making meads and stuff, because we pump out honey out of a 5-gallon pail. We store it in 55-gallon drums. So we just kind of repack it down in the equipment that we use. So then I'm going to take my hot water. We'll pour it in the funnel a little bit here. Get some of the sugar content off the funnel here. Yeah. Very good. I kept my lid for my funnel. That way you don't drip and make a mess. Throw everything in your sink. Kind of keep everything. You want to keep everything so it's not so sticky, because honey will be a sticky mess if you really get to go on this. And if you're drinking some mead while you're doing it, it's going to get messy. So we've got our honey and our starting water. I put the lid back on. Now we're going to dissolve the honey that we put in there with that hot warm water. And like I said, the water isn't boiling hot. It's just enough to dissolve the sugars. And like I said, we use plastic to start out. And that way if you drop it or anything, you can even transfer this into your glass jugs when you're done. They're a little bit heavier to shake and mix doing this paint can mixing method. Spoons don't fit in here, blending units don't fit in here. but it doesn't take much to mash down this sugar into a liquid. And like I said, I'm only using 3 to 4 cups of hot water, and that was for the whole thing, for getting the honey out of the jar to blending down my 3 pounds of honey in here in my jug. And as you can see, it's pretty much all dissolved and liquefied in your system, which is what we want. Nice. So you can see the water that we've already added has become cloudy. So we're going to bring up this, and due to the fact the water was warm and we only used a little amount, the water that we use will help drop the temperature back down to where we can add the yeast. So I have my other funnel. Right, the objects to not make too much of a mess. Now, if you've noticed, I had 2 pitchers full of water, but as we added honey to the jug, we've taken up volume, so we're not going to use all 1 gallon's worth of water. Now at the end, when fermentation is done, and you have sediment at the bottom and you rack out of this, you're going to still lose more volume of this. You can always add water back into this after you do it the first racking. Let it ferment out a little bit more when you mix it, because when you mix this with what's in here, you're going to get some oxidization. You're going to stir whatever residual yeast that's floating in there, and you might get a little more fermentation. But when you add water after fermentation, remember, alcohol drops, but you get volume. Some people don't mind if their mead's 9%. It's about taste, and that's okay. And some people like rubbing alcohol, and they like it at 23%. So that all comes with variables of the yeast, icing, back flavoring, and types of sugars that you're using for adjuncts. But right now, I'm going to go ahead, and I've got some water in here, and what I'm going to do is we're going to make sure that we've got the sugar mixed in with all the water that we got. And this also puts air in here for the yeast to start, right? So a little bit of air isn't bad, right? But the object's not to have a lot of floating ambience fall into it. That's why we use an airlock or balloon. That way we can keep all the original flavors in it. Like I said, I like using a balloon because it keeps all the aromas and smells with the meads that we're using. So now we're just going to tap this off. I am going to leave a little bit of headspace for fermentation. Remember, the more you add to it, such as adjuncts and stuff, volume drops. Honey's going to bring up some volume, adjuncts bring up some volume. That's why I said, you start off in some smaller things, move up to 3 gallon. This is just basically to make sure you're making a good mead that you like. It's going to get you 2 great bottles that you're going to be able to keep. It's going to give you a 3rd bottle to try it out, sample it, and a half of another bottle maybe, depending on the adjuncts you put in it. And I usually fill it to the bottom of my funnel. That usually gives me about a good 1.5 inches of space for fermentation. And that's basically what you want, is about 1 inch, 1.5 inches. And it depends on what kind of adjuncts and nutrients you put in. We're not putting any of that now. But as you can see, this is the water level that's left after adding the honey. And that's about how much honey we put in there, which is kind of per volume of what you're looking at. This is something we can save for the next mead. You can drink it, you can water your plant with it, you can use it for your additive to fill things back up when you're done. So this is a good time to go ahead and let's look at the temperature of our mead. Right, so this is a centigrade and not a Fahrenheit. And I'm sitting at about 25 degrees centigrade. And that's the ambient temperature around. So I'm going to stick this inside my mead to get a good center core temperature. I want it to be about the same as the room temperature. Right now in Fahrenheit my basement is around 72. So this is going to be about 72 degrees. We try to keep it around 68. I don't think anything higher than 78, the yeast doesn't activate as good. And anything below 65, it's too cold for the activation of the yeast. That's almost like slow fermentation from cold crashing. So hopefully right now if we pull this out, yeah, our temperature's at 25 degrees centigrade. So with using the warm water and small amount, and then using the water from ambient air temperature to add it back in, it's going to get the temperatures to about where you can drop your yeast in. And that's what we want. So that's what we're going to write down. On here is our temp, because we're going to drop our yeast in. Now that we've got our temperature, let's take a hydrometer reading. Now our hydrometer, you can get hydrometer tubes. They're a long cylindrical tube that you can fill up. This is going to float. Now, most people let their mead sit for 24 hours to keep the foam and stuff down. I recommend that. It'll drop the temperatures of your mead to the room temperature in 24 hours. Able for your yeast to really start off and get going. But you can just stick your hydrometer in and it's going to balance. Right in the top, I usually give it a spin that puts a wave around it where the sediment is so I can get a good accurate reading. We're going to pull it up and we're at 1.200 on it. So we're at 1.200 on the hydrometer reading, which is a good reading if you're looking at it when it comes to alcohol content. This already has an alcohol lever on it, and we're running at about 17% alcohol. So you can usually let this sit for 24 hours so you can get a better reading and it gets to the ambient temperature. Or you can take your reading with your thermometer and just take a hydrometer reading. Remember, we want to be at a good alcohol ratio for what we're doing. I just want to make sure here. Yeah, we're at 1.200. So that's a good hydrometer reading. Now before I put it back, I am going to just kind of wash it off real quick to get the sugar solution and stuff off of it. And we don't want anything stuck to it before I put it back into the case. These are very damaging, so I usually keep them in a case because I don't want to lose them or break them. So I've taken a hydrometer reading, and what we're going to do is we're going to write that down. Starting gravity, or what they call original gravity, OG or SG, we're at 1.200, which I think is a good reading. Now, we've already got this already. This is your mead. This is your wort mixture. What I usually do is I usually take a measuring cup. I pour a little bit of the mix in the measuring cup. This is going to help you do a yeast starter. Now, you can just take your yeast and drop it in. Don't get me wrong, that works just fine. Me, I like to see if I can get some activation with my yeast. So I'm going to dump it in here that already has the sugar solution made. which was my sugar solution. Give it a little toss, you know, mix it up a little bit to get the yeast kind of all saturated in it. Some people go ahead and stir it up with a spoon, right? That's whatever you want to do. I just kind of jostle it a little bit to get the yeast to kind of sink a little bit, to get an even mix. And what we're going to do is we're going to let this rise like a cake, right? So when this yeast rises, we will dump it back in the jug and put our balloon on it, which will be our airlock. Since we're going to go ahead and wait, I've already made my recipe. I've already put the date of 1/7/17. We've got the starting temperature, the new starting gravity, and our recipe. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to tape this right onto my jug. That way I know what I've started with, what this is. If you place it to the side, you won't forget. And I think using just this tape and this index card method works just fine, because you're going to be able to cut it off when you want to. So now we've got our mead all ready to go for the yeast additive. Save the lids to your jug. I'll show you why. Now, this one's all ready to go. So we did one a week prior to this video. This is what it looks like in 1 week. Now you can see it's a little cloudy. If you look at it, you can see the little bubbles traveling up the side from the CO2 bursting out from the yeast eating the sugar. So you're going to be able to see a little bubbleization on the side. As you can see, we have our index card here in the front of the recipe that we used. This one was done December 30th, 2016. 3 pounds clover honey, 1 gallon of Arrowhead dollar store water. It has 1 pack of the Premier Red Star Champagne yeast. The temperature was 70 degrees when we dropped the yeast in, and its starting gravity was 1.225. So it's 0.025, a little bit more than this one. So we're at the same range of everything that's going on. So this is basically what it looks like in 1 week of starting your yeast. The balloon's already starting to blow up. You already start to see bubbling of everything that's going on. All right, so we did one even further back. This one was done in October. This was the same one. I have it written here on a green tape instead of using the index card. Clover, honey, starting gravity 1.235. So this one needs to even add a little bit mildly, a little more honey in it. It's already, as you can see, it's clearing up. It's not as cloudy as this one. The balloon has gone down. It's not, this one isn't as cloudy as this one because this doesn't have the yeast activated. This one's cloudy. This one has activation. This one's done fermentation. So what's really cool about this is that this one basically here is ready to cold crash. Now I have already yeast sediment at the bottom. It's already starting to clear, but we want to go ahead and cold crash it to make sure that all the yeast is killed off, unless we're going to do a secondary fermentation, which means we might split this in half, letting the yeast go into 2 jugs, adding another batch of 2 pounds of honey to each and water, and letting the fermentation go again. And that way I'm making more rounded and using the same yeast cake. So what we're going to do is we're going to cold crash this one. So I'm going to transfer from here to here. And the best way to do that is with a racking cane. And on my racking cane, I have a little filter unit just in case I get any residual. This is a very fine microscreen. You can get it from brewing stores. You can order it online. And I'm going to put it right on the end of my tube. And it's going to catch any sediment before it goes into this jug. So basically, this fits down in the jug like this. That way it'll catch anything before it gets into my jug. And with this auto siphon, I'm able to pump it. And I can pump it down to where I want the residual at without getting sediment in. So I reduce the sediment from coming up in by keeping it off the bottom a little bit. And I reduce sediment getting into my jug by putting a filter on it. Now, you can do it many different ways. You can do it with different types of filtering units. It depends where you get it from. Smells like honey. That's one reason why I like the balloons, is the aerobics and stuff stay with the honey itself and the mead. And when it's cleared up, you can actually see the bottom of your pump. With the other ones, you're not going to be able to see it because they're not cleared up enough. And this is clearing up all by itself with no bentonite, no nutrients, nothing else added to it, no Irish moss. So I'm just going to get it down there to the bottom, and I'm just going to give it a couple pumps, and we're going to just transfer this off. Now this could be gravity fed if I want to put it higher, but the reason I use it like this is so I can watch what I'm doing and I can kind of control the flow. And all I'm doing is I'm transferring